So the next project on the new 79 series is to install the long range Brown Davis fuel tank. Again, we're going to do it in STS Garage on the floor, albeit with the tray off. I think it will be quite achievable. Let's get into it.
Oh my God.
Okay, I've got a spare.
What have you done?
Oh my God. It's awkward and it's painful. Okay, so this long range tank is the 110 litre that goes down underneath the driver's side floor. There is a few different options with long range tanks for this thing. I was actually looking at an ARB full replacement, which is a poly tank, and it takes the rear tank from 130 to 180. And I do like the idea of that because it doesn't add a lot of weight to the vehicle when the tank is empty, or it really would nearly probably weigh lighter than the standard tank, but does give you an extra 50 litres capacity. The only thing I find wrong with that is it's all behind the rear axle because the standard tank is back there anyway and it's a replacement. So the Brown Davis tank does add a bit of weight to the vehicle even without the fuel, but it is forward of the axle up under the driver's side, and especially then once the tank is full of fuel, you know, that weight is in a better position. Not only that, you can get a transfer pump on this tank to transfer fuel to the rear tank and then suck from there to the front, or you can get a full changeover valve. So for this, I've opted for the changeover valve, which means I can empty the rear tank first as we're driving, and I'm getting rid of that weight behind the rear axle. So especially if you're towing and things like that, you got, you know, 300 kilos of ball weight, you know, plus maybe a big heavy canopy. To have that weight further forward is also a bonus. I had one of these in the previous vehicle and it was quite good, albeit I did crack one of the mounts on it. I fixed that up myself. We did do some pretty hard driving in that thing, and look, things happen. Fixed it up, wasn't a big issue. Didn't actually crack the tank where, you know, fuel come out or anything. But that's an honest review of it, guys. I find it was, you know, it did the job for me, so I'm going there again. I like that it changes over. I like the fuel is further forward of the axle, and obviously the range that it gives you, 240 litres all up, 110 and 130 standard. The tank retails for around $1,800, and then if you were to pay someone to install it, I'd say they will want $500 to $600 at least to install this. They're going to book the car in for 5 to 6 hours at least, I would say, on a hoist. So let's get in and do it ourselves. Enough dribbling. You get this thing out of the box and open up the box of bolts and fittings and things it comes with, and you go, what in the hell have we got ourselves into? And there is exactly 15 pages of instructions, double-sided, and a massive box of bobs and bits, because obviously there's electrical fittings, your changeover valve, wiring, a multitude of bolts and hose fittings. Righto, first few little jobs is to make a bit of room underneath the car. There's a couple of wiring looms and bits and bobs we need to relocate, so let's get under and do that. Take this bracket off that holds those looms, and they just get zip tied up out of the road. One of the first jobs it says is to cut these tabs off these fuel line clips. However, in the photo it shows the fuel line clips and fuel lines going down the right hand side of the chassis here. This is a 2024 model new shape, and I can see in the picture it shows this part of the cross member and fuel lines here, which are not there. They are brake lines. So the fuel lines run on the passenger side of a 2024. So there's a little trick for you guys. Hopefully I'm not going to run into any other dramas. We'll see how we go. But that will actually make it easier as long as this part of the fuel line isn't in the road. If that has changed, we might be in a bit of strife. But we'll see how we go. Okay, again, I think the handbrake bracket here that it's asking me to remove is slightly different. So we're finding a few different things in this later model. We'll keep pushing on. Hopefully I don't hit any snags. Okay, so this bracket stays on. Cut this piece of rubber here and just get rid of this bracket and discard it. undo that one. Now the handbrake can move around freely, and it'll bolt to the tank later on. Right, next step, we've got a relocation bracket for the brake lines here. Comes with this little supplied bracket here. It goes in there like that. Righto. Okay, so we might bolt this on first. So we bolt the original brake line bracket to the bracket supplied, and then bolt back onto the chassis. Righto, it's time to get the tanks out and start prepping them with all the brass fittings and hoses. So this long range tank is actually 2 tanks, because there's a cross member in the middle there, and there's half goes each side of that connected with pipes. So it is reasonably painful to install in that respect, but we'll get the tanks out and start fitting them up. This part I'm going to the instructions for, so follow the instructions. They are quite detailed, and I'll give you a look how it looks at the end with all the little brass fittings in it. So you fit your fuel pickup barb, your return line barb, your breather barb, and there'll be 2 barbs left for each tank to join together. They go in later once the tanks are installed into the vehicle. Install the fuel line onto the pickup and the return line barb as per the instructions. Remove the heat shield from the cab and trim as per the instructions to clear the tank. If you are fitting a torqued exhaust, however, you can probably leave this part off, as I did realise later on when I went to fit the exhaust, you can discard this anyway as the muffler's in a different position. Alright, now the real benefit of not having a tray, we've got a cross member that goes across the back half of the chassis here, which mounts the tank and also that changeover valve. It says to mount this cross member just rearward of the brake proportioning valve. Obviously that was written for an earlier model. Later model vehicles don't have that anymore because you've got the full-on ABS system. So we're just going to put the bracket on and leave it loose for the minute until we put the tank in so we can get a location on it. So there's a couple of little tricks that don't really relate to these vehicles anymore. They probably need to upgrade their instructions a little. 2 brackets, 1 for each side, that clamp around the chassis. It's quite obvious what goes where because we have some fuel lines and brake lines and stuff to get around. So you put the narrower one on the passenger side, the wider one on the driver's side. Righto, so that's the changeover valve mounted to that cross member, and it will look really close to that diff housing. And when I first did it on the original ute, I was really concerned that it was going to hit. It never did. This D-Wiz housing, however, is different to the original. Not much in shape at that point though. So again, it looks too close. Looks like if the suspension comes right up, it's going to hit it. But it never did on the last ute, so it shouldn't on this one. It's time to put that rear tank that you connected all the hoses to, or the 2 hoses and all the barbs, into position. It's a matter of just pushing it up, and it's pretty self-explanatory where it all bolts together. Okay, so there's a lot of swearing and struggling to get that in, to be honest. It is quite painful to get that in when you're doing it from the floor. I just used the trolley jack, jacked it up underneath. I've got Meegs to give me a hand. That is a 2-person job trying to get that in, for sure. But it can be done, and I know the front tank is a lot easier than that one. That's the worst one, so it's probably the worst part done. Just removed the valve while I was putting that tank in so I didn't damage it. If you're on a hoist and you're lifting it up nice and easy, you'd probably be alright. But yeah, again, I really recommend taking the tray off to do this. It's just so much easier than the first time I installed this tank. Righto, the front tank into position now. I have got Meegs here helping me. She's gonna wheel it in on the trolley for me. And then we have some U-bolts that clamp around the front cross member. And yeah, there's nothing here but lots of swearing and awkwardness. That's the only way to do it. Two brackets where the tanks meet together actually overlap each other. There's one captive nut that's already in the chassis then there's 2 holes you actually have to drill through the cross member. The front is held on by the U-bolts. Look, it is one of those things, it's just trial and error. The fuel lines that run across the middle of this cross member, which I don't think are like that in previous models, however, do work. You just have to manipulate them around, and they do clear the tank everywhere, so they're not rubbing anywhere. You don't want them to rub. So we'll get these holes drilled in these middle brackets, bolt them up, and then it's a matter of putting the hoses to join the 2 tanks together, and then everything else will be done at the back around that changeover valve, and then in a little bit of wiring up on top of that rear tank where that sender unit is. Remember, those wires could have been done a bit earlier. You can reach up there and feel them. They're not too hard to get to. And then there's a grommet in the floor we should be able to get to still as well. So get these bolted up and get out from under this bloody car. 2 remaining barbs that we didn't fit earlier on, it's time to put them on now. I've been using Stag jointing paste, so this stuff's safe with fuels and oils and stuff like that to seal up all these fittings. So we'll get in and put those 2, they face each other, put the piece of hose in between that it says in the instructions, and then the filler hose also at the bottom. Out from underneath that bloody car. Look, there's no 2 easy ways to put this. It's awkward and it's painful, but it can be done. And think of the money you're saving, guys. So on the floor, yeah, a hoist. STS Garage needs a hoist because that sucks. Righto, let's get in and hook all these hoses up. Get it done. We got this valve worked out eventually. Look, there's no real clear instructions of where to route the hoses. So it's just a matter of mucking around and trying to find where they're nice and relaxed and we're not kinking any. So I'll show you what I've done. I'll try to go into as much detail as possible because I think this is a nice way of doing it. There is a little inline filter you can put between the auxiliary tank and this changeover valve. I've chosen not to because we're going to run a secondary filter under the bonnet as well. Then if you're running off this secondary tank, that'll be 3 filters that the pump's got to suck through. So we've opted not to do that. That's up to you guys. I'll show you how I have routed these hoses. So these 2 hoses come from the auxiliary tank. So you've got a feed line and a return line. They go into the passenger side at the bottom of this Polac changeover valve. Then we have the original lines coming out of the main tank. I've bent these up a little bit higher and they go down and around and step down into a joiner on the feed line. The return line's fine and go into the top passenger side of the changeover valve. And then to feed the engine, we go up over this cross member and back down for the feed line. For the return line, it can curl up underneath and straight in. Now I've gone up, over and down because I could not get this to curl without kinking unless I did it that way. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but that's what worked for me. So the other one we've got to worry about is your breather line. So this is a factory breather on your main tank. So we tee into that and add it to the fast fill breather for the filler. Now I'm going to stop at that point. So I'm going to leave mine as is like that because the tray I'm getting has fill points in the headboard. The kit does come with a filler neck. Now if that's going into a standard Triple M tray setup, it is quite tight in there to get that in. I know from previous experience. So the battle continues. Look, I'm going to throw it out there and say that diff housing was probably a simpler job, a little bit more time consuming just for the simple fact the amount of bolts and stuff you got to undo, but pretty straightforward. This is a little bit fiddly and the instructions aren't super clear. There's a few things you do have to sort of, really read over and over and over again to try and, get it to work. But we'll keep pushing on. I've got a couple of little things to finish it off and then we'll have a good look at it. Well, it's hot, dirty work. Got an old shirt here as a rag. Speaking of rags, go and get yourself an STS Garage tee. We're really proud of these designs. If you don't really like them, just use them as a rag. Get yourself 3 or 4. Time to do with a little bit of wiring. There's not a lot with this tank, and I'm not going to finish it today. We're going to get all these wires from the sender, and that's your fuel level gauge and your changeover valve, run into the cab. And I'll show you where I run those through because there's a nice little spot for them. This is what can make or break a really good touring vehicle, is how well the electrical's done. Because if you don't do it very well, you'll have gremlins forever. and something I really want to nail with this one. That's why I'm not going to finish this today. I'm going to wait until I start the inside and do the whole lot together. Trying to limit how many times you pull a car apart is also important. You're just creating more rattles and more chances of breaking plastic clips off the interior panels and things like that. So we're going to go through and cut some of these wires off. Now, why I'm cutting wires out is we only use terminals E and D on this plug that goes into this changeover valve. So we're going to cut the other 3 off. We'll bend them over and put a bit of heat shrink on them, and that's those 3 out of the road. The remaining 2 wires we solder onto the supplied twin core wire and run them into the cab. Just written down on the instructions which wire is red, so I can reference it to the switch when we do go to install the switch in the dash. Run the twin core wire from the changeover valve and the single purple wire from the sender into the back right hand corner of the cab via one of the grommets that is unused, ready for your switch and your gauge. Okay, so there's plenty of grommets in the floor underneath the seat here. We've got the sender and the switchover valve wiring. And like I said, we're not going to complete the wiring today. I'm going to wait until I do all the doors, speaker pods, the rear brake controller, and anything else I need to put in here. We're going to do it all in one go. So obviously we're going to go ahead now and put the tail shaft in, and I'm going to install the, I can't remember the name of the bloody exhaust. What's the name of the exhaust? It's a... Toolkit. Well done. We're going to install the 3.5 inch DPF back, yes, DPF still in, exhaust. I'm slowly getting my shed back. This is a really easy DIY job. Don't pay someone to install this exhaust. You just lay on your back and I reckon 20 minutes to have the old one out, new one in. Obviously we've still got the old one out from when we did the diff housing, and I knew I was replacing it, so it just gave us more room to work under there. But definitely an easy DIY. And there's a lot of talk about removing DPFs and things. And to be honest, I've really hardly ever heard of anyone getting in trouble for removing their DPF. But I've gone to a lot of trouble to keep the car legal as far as GVM and GCM upgrading, the rear diff housing. So I can't see the point in making it illegal. And also the last ute had 60,000 Ks. It was tuned for that whole 60,000 Ks, and not once I ever had an issue. They really are a quality bit of gear. It's what I had in the last ute. It never had a crack, never obviously got rusty. It's high quality stainless steel, and it's a nice note without being a full-on thong slapper. So we'll go torque it again. Oh my god, I'm so sore. Yeah. They say exercise is good for you. It can't be if you feel like this. So the EGT gauge that I took out of the original exhaust goes back in. Do up these spring bolts. Sounds exactly like the last one, surprisingly. That's sweet. People say, why didn't you just get the 4-cylinder? Because it's faster and it's got an auto. Because of that. That makes all the difference. That's the long range tank, the exhaust, and the rear diff housing complete. Next time on the 79 series build, we're going to get stuck into the interior, get those door speaker pods on, and I've got an amplifier that runs through the factory head unit. It's not about having some crazy big stereo, but the one that's in it is ridiculous. You can't hear it at 100 k's an hour. It is really bad. It's another one of those Toyota things. Other than the long range tank and the exhaust, we're just fixing what Toyota really buggered up, to be honest. There's a few things with the 79 series that you really shouldn't have to spend money on, but we're choosing to. So anyway, guys, don't forget, you only live once. Get out in the shed and get into that project. See you next time.